Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Shabri Datta, and I'm the Marketing Specialist at SNIC Solutions. Today, we are presenting what is the cornerstone of a successful R&D strategy. The webinar is brought to you by SNIC Solutions, a value-added reseller focused on making research and development paperless. And this webinar is sponsored by Siemens Ops Center Research, Development, and Laboratory Solution Portfolio Division from Siemens Digital Industries Software. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your control panel. I'll also bring them up during the presentation, and we'll have some time for questions at the end. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our moderator for today, Nikhil Joshi, founder and CEO of SNIC Solutions. Over to you, Nikhil.
Thanks, Shabri. Welcome to one and all here for this webinar. Let me introduce us as well as our speakers today for this presentation. If you could quickly have the next slide. As Shabri introduced us, my background is in manufacturing operations management and industrial and systems engineering. I've been around for more than 15 years implementing software in labs, in manufacturing operations across multiple industries covering process and batch manufacturing. But the highlight today is not me. We have two experts from Siemens Digital Industries Software who are going to be talking a little more on what a successful R&D strategy is. Let me introduce firstly Christopher Piella. Chris, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Sure. Chris is a portfolio development specialist at Siemens Digital Industries Software. He comes with more than 20 years of background in process industries and has a background of implementing a wide range of software portfolio in process industries. Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks again.
Also, we have Jeff Everhart. Jeff has a background being a chemist for many years until he joined Siemens Digital Industries Software as a lab solutions specialist, and he is a specialist when it comes to looking at labs and process industries and carrying out digital transformation initiatives in these areas. So thank you, Jeff, for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's a pleasure.
All right. So without further delay, to set the context of the R&D strategy here, I would like to hand over Chris and Jeff. And Chris, maybe you and Jeff, if you could take us through some of the challenges that you see quality labs and process industries are facing globally, and if you could then tell us a little bit more on the strategies that you recommend to adopt in this digital age. We look forward to knowing more from both of your experiences here. So over to you, Chris.
Perfect, Nikhil. Thank you very much. And again, it's a pleasure to work with you and to speak with everyone online today. So to begin, I'm going to start with a little overview of what we consider the new product creation process, and you'll get the sense as we go through the presentation that Jeff and I have worked together closely for a number of years. So we'll be some back and forth between Jeff and I as we go through the presentation. But let's begin with the general process for new product creation in the formulated product industry. So everyone's all manufacturers are focused on the customer, right? Because with the voice of the customer carries with it requirements and ideas, right, for new formulations and new products and new designs. And when we, as a manufacturer, we listen for that voice, we gather those ideas and we coalesce those ideas into a project, right? So we have a project manager and we create requirements and we define these projects based upon the voice of the customer. And then the project manager will enlist the help of the formulation teams, right? The chemists, right? So we're going to pull those people in to have them start designing the new formulation that's going to meet the needs of the requirements of the project. Our formulation team, well, they may have to enlist the help of our suppliers, right? So we're going to be looking for a way to collaborate with our supplier network to make sure they can provide us the quality of raw materials and meet the specifications that we need for our new product design. We're also going to pull in our process managers because we need to make sure we can articulate a well-defined bill of process for this new product. And we're going to pull in our lab managers and our laboratory team, and they're critically important because what's going to happen within our lab is going to create a small batch of the new draft formulation, and they're going to test that formulation draft against the requirements that were articulated back in the original project, and they're going to work with the formulation team to say, did this formula meet the requirements, or was there a challenge and we need to go back and modify the formulation? And that may iterate a few times in the process. And then we're going to have to work with our regulatory affairs team because our regulatory affairs team is going to have to review the new formulation and make sure that all documentation that's required it meets the needs of our regulatory agencies, right? And make sure the product is in compliance with all the target markets that we may be sending this new product to. But let's be honest, right? This is the happy path, right? This is the path where everyone has enough time to do their jobs. No one's under any real, pressure. Everybody's working together. It's really not reality. It looks really nice on a whiteboard, but outside of a whiteboard or a classroom, it's probably not the reality that we see in our factories and our manufacturing facilities today. Today, really, what are we seeing today? It's something that's more like this, right? We are challenged with accelerating our innovation cycle. And guess what? It's concurrent. These innovation cycles are going on all the time. Never has that phrase, innovate or die, that we remember reading from all the business journals. It's never been more true than it is today. We're challenged with needing to work on numerous projects concurrently. And not only must we bring new products to market more rapidly, but we must also update and optimize existing products as compliance and regulatory challenges are changed over our target markets. So we need to adjust our existing products to meet the needs of new target markets. Jeff and I, again, we work together quite a bit. We recently spoke with a chemist who stated that she's currently working on 90 different project teams, and she jumps in and out of each project as the process and her schedule allows. Another company that Jeff and I work with stated publicly, right? So this is in the president's letter that's attached to their last year's annual report. And they said that their goal is to drive 25% of their annual revenue from products that were released in the last 4 years. And this is an ongoing goal for the business itself. That sounds really great from an outside perspective, or if I stopped there. But the reality is this company's annual revenue is approximately $15 billion. So that means nearly $4 billion of revenue each year must be derived from products that were introduced to the market within the previous 48 months. That is an outstanding challenge for their innovation team to be able to meet. And in reality, who knows if that's going to be enough, right? They're in a very, very competitive market. And while they're the market leader today, they could become a commodity supplier tomorrow. So if we were to look at the new product creation process, one of the things we need to understand is that there are certain challenges that are unique to specific stakeholders in the process. For example, the challenge of the market demanding more complex and specialty products is very impactful to stakeholders who are involved in the project requirements definition process, and it's very impactful to the formulation personnel who are designed to develop these specialty products. Jeff, so just a little side note here, but Jeff, do you have any examples you can share with us on this topic?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Actually, this is an interesting topic, and we certainly do see a lot more demand for custom and specialty products manufacturers. One of their common challenges that we hear again and again from our customer product manufacturers is that their customers are really demanding more ecologically friendly, or green alternatives for existing products. It actually almost goes without saying, but obviously the consumer really expects product performance to not be compromised, even though they are now going green. One side note is, the chemists, who we work with in some of these businesses face a unique set of challenges. They simply cannot, afford to make each new product from basically a clean sheet design, and they certainly cannot afford to rely on tribal knowledge to remember, which blends and recipes actually worked effectively against each new customer requirement. Also, as you mentioned earlier in the talk, the demand for innovation, acceleration, and the time to market, these pressures, do not diminish, just because your product has become even more complex. Basically, what we're seeing is the market really just does not care. And in some cases, the time to market pressure actually increases when the product is, a specialty or custom blend formulation. One company we actually worked with who faced this exact same situation, actually springs to mind. Not only did they manufacture specialty brands for their customers, they were also in a highly competitive field where the customer would essentially fire them if the custom blends, were not effective or were not, really delivered on time. Not only was failure not an option for them, but delay, was definitely not an option either. What was essential, for this, specific use case and this manufacturer to survive and even thrive in this highly competitive environment was the ability to leverage their historical product data and easily, identify characteristics that could be used again in a controlled reuse model, to meet some of the current demands. By having this ability, no new blend was, ever a completely blank sheet design, which really helped them out. And not only did this accelerate the development time for that new product, but it also brought confidence in the new custom product due to knowing previous success, that they've had with, some of the product formulations that they were reusing. Does that answer, some of the, challenges that, some of the, folks that we're, talking with on a regular basis, see today, Chris?
Yeah, Jeff, those are some good examples, and I remember working with you on some of these with some of those customers. Another common challenge that Jeff and I see is that manufacturers and markets for those manufacturers become more distributed. As these markets become more distributed and more global, manufacturers need to have a way to standardize on both their products and their processes. So this challenge can be very impactful to the process design engineers and the laboratory team who are involved in quality testing. So Jeff, just to add to you again, I mean, especially given your background as a former lab manager, what are your thoughts regarding this global process standardization?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. This is actually a topic that is brought up, rather routinely, in a lot of our discussions with, some of our prospects and our customers. The big challenge for some of these manufacturers that we're seeing is the ability to enforce procedures across a distributed group of employees. And by distributed, I really mean, a single lab, across, various employee shifts could be one. or across the manufacturing, the individual manufacturing campuses, or even multiple labs across the globe. One example that really comes to mind, for example, is the challenge that they had mentioned was in their quality testing used in the laboratory, and the manufacturers really needed to have confidence in their products, that the quality standards were met. So to ensure that product quality, they basically tested a number of product samples in their labs. Well, if you have multiple labs, how do each quality test is performed in a uniform manner by a specific standard operating procedure and by a qualified lab technician? This one customer that comes to mind, worked that we worked with really faced a unique set of challenges around this exact topic. Not only did they manufacture a number of products and have a number of labs to test and qualify their product, but some of these entire batches of the product were held in purgatory and could not even be shipped until the quality tests were performed. This is typically a very typical example. So in this case, not only was the lab process standardized and very important to the customer, but the ability to capture and drive best practices across our organization. I think upwards around 15 labs was critical to optimize the product sample throughput, and really to eliminate at the end of the day delays in shipping due to waiting for the quality testing results to be executed. One last point really for this customer was being able to standardize on a unified platform, which provided insight into a number of things, anywhere from sampling time, a lab equipment backlog, lab qualifications, which allowed them to execute quality testing efficiently and really meet the product delivery demands, of their business. So that's, an example that really comes to mind, that, we worked with, rather recently. So thanks, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. And I do remember them. And like I said, that was a good point regarding it's not just the ability to standardize processes, but also the ability to capture best practices and kind of optimize those processes and distribute those best practices across their laboratory network. So another common challenge we see for our formulated product manufacturers is in dealing with increasingly complex regulatory and compliance concerns. I think I mentioned that in one of the previous slides. And then we add to this the increased pressure of even like social media and its ability to influence consumers even beyond government regulatory compliance. This challenge sits squarely on the shoulders of our product stewards and our regulatory compliance managers. So they're absolutely a key stakeholder, and even you can see that from that picture we've included in the slide, it affects Siemens because we're not only a solutions provider, but we're a manufacturer ourselves. So to be able to meet those global regulatory and compliance requirements is a challenge for all of us. So Jeff, again, as a laboratory former laboratory manager, and given your experience with there, what are your thoughts from listening to all the companies we speak to, and when we start talking about regulatory compliance criteria during the product design, manufacturing, and distribution process?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. No, this is a topic on the forefront. I mean, this is a very important topic, and absolutely one group of people we regularly work with, our compliance officers and quality managers, anywhere from the quality control testing, quality assurance, that sort of thing. And many times, their product stewardship groups are intimately involved when we actually start discussing challenges to their current processes, and even when we start building new processes around their product development process. So from time to time, again, we hear from compliance officers on the challenges they face to approve new products for certain markets. The product approval process can delay the company's ability to enter their target market. With the advent, of social media and the nearly instantaneous news cycle of today's digitally connected world, the risk of a compliance oversight is far greater and negative to the brand than the revenue risk, of being second to the market. Essentially, the product approval process all boils down to the extensive paperwork and auditing that needs to be performed by that compliance team. They need material traceability, must maintain all raw material information, including supplier information. And we're seeing, like, if this company has, this data stored in various systems or even on paper, this job, becomes extremely challenging. Another challenge we often hear from product stewards and compliance officers is the need to be able to react to alerts from their raw material suppliers. Essentially, when a supplier announces there may be an issue with a raw material, the compliance team needs to be able to move quickly to identify which products are impacted by this concern. These product stewards, really need to be able to rapidly perform what we call where used searches across the entire portfolio. And without an integrated formulation management system in place, this task can be extremely laborious and in some cases, completely impossible. These product stewards demand a solution, with the ability to easily interrogate a product's bill of materials and readily understand which raw materials went into producing which product. As an example of this, which our listeners, may be, really familiar with here in the United States, is the regulations around PFOA, which is, one of the chemical components commonly used in the production of nonstick cookware, such as frying pans and baking dishes. There are health concerns, around PFOA. I mean, that's, undisputable. But the allowable, limits vary from region to region, and from very low levels allowable to zero amount allowable to even more extreme restrictions where a manufacturer must prove that PFOA was never even used in the manufacturing process. So if we actually combine this with the regulatory aspects around PFOA, there's also the social media aspect where consumers may demand PFOA-free products even in regions where small amounts are allowable. And in these cases, the ability to label a product as PFOA-free could be a huge competitive advantage. Prepared manufacturers can take advantage of this situation by having their formulation teams design nonstick coating that, are not only PFOA-free, but also prove to the consumer that there are no PFOA chemicals present in any of the intermediate manufacturing steps, and that there are no PFOA or similar chemicals produced as a byproduct of the manufacturing process to potentially impact the environment. I believe the foundation to be able to do this is by having full visibility not only into the product's bill of material, which is essential, but also have full visibility into material tracking throughout, the product's entire value chain, from raw material sourcing to recipe scaling and transfer to production, and as we move into distribution to the global market. I believe that this PFOA topic is a good example of how a manufacturer with an integrated digital enterprise strategy in place can, really take what some might see as a significant business challenge and turn it into a competitive advantage, which, in turn will give them, a leadership position in their market. So, I mean, that example really, I think, speaks, nicely, to the increase in compliance and regulations challenges, that some of our manufacturers are seeing today.
I agree with you, Jeff, and I think as well that it also shows how some manufacturers, with the ability to, right, by having the infrastructure in place, can turn some of those challenges into business strengths by being able to meet those compliance concerns and advertise the fact that they are, in some cases, even exceeding the compliance requirements that the government may put in place. So that's a very good example. So as we kind of come to the conclusion of some of the presentation that Jeff and I have prepared, I wanted to provide a visual of what a complete R&D strategy needs to meet, in really a complete strategy that meets the needs of all the stakeholders within the new product development process. So this includes people like chemists, This includes people like laboratory technicians and laboratory managers. It certainly includes product stewards and regulatory affairs personnel. It can include your supply chain and packaging, and certainly can include executives and management. Right, these are all people that need to be considered when looking at a complete R&D strategy. That said, this is a complex, right? The idea of beginning such a journey can seem overwhelming, and I kind of use the analogy. Sometimes it feels like we're drinking from the fire hose. So with this in mind, a solution needs to be modular, right? For example, if I use a highlight here in green, you may consider starting with the laboratory, a company who says, our priority is focusing in on product quality and quality testing. In that instance where that's the focus, they may choose to focus in on the laboratory. Other companies, I'm going to highlight here we'll call it orange. Other companies may choose to begin their journey focusing on specification management, right? And because they may say, hey, we need to get our intellectual property under control, under tighter control. So they want to start their journey focusing in on specification management and formulation management aspects of it. Ultimately, though, what they really need is a integrated platform that supports collaboration across all these stakeholders, and focusing them all together to meet the innovation goals of the organization. So, Nikhil, with that slide, I'd like to conclude Jeff's and I portion of the presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Chris and Jeff. We will give our attendees a few seconds here to put questions on the chat box, and I will bring that up to you, Chris or Jeff, to whoever it is assigned to. So let's give it a few seconds while we have questions. You mentioned, Chris, the strategy, and it seemed like a very phased approach that people would say. So one question that comes to my mind is that is it better to start in small pieces, or is it better to do everything together? What's your take on it, Chris?
Well, that's a good question. It's really what we do is work with the manufacturer to determine, like a doctor meeting with a patient, where is the greatest pain and what needs to be addressed first. So I would say commonly companies will pursue this journey in phases. And the other reality that we deal with is companies, a lot of times in this world, right, there's a lot of merger and acquisition activity, and companies may have legacy systems in place that, while not optimal, may meet the immediate requirements. So I would say our common approach is a phased approach, where a company may begin by saying we need to focus in on specification management, for example, and then work our way into lab. Or again, if quality is a concern, they may work with quality, work with the lab, and then work their way backwards into specification management. Although I will say this, Nikhil, to almost buy back my words, I can think of one example where Jeff and I met with a company who was very, very focused on specification management, and they had a legacy lab system in place. And they were extremely excited about the capabilities that a new specification management system would bring to the company. And they said, well, but we have our old lab system, and that might work well for us. And it was, I can think back to Jeff saying to them, well, can I just ask you for 10 minutes to let me show you why a lab system that is tightly integrated to the specification management system might be beneficial to you, not having to keystroke things in, not having to re-enter data multiple times in 2 different systems. And he gave them about a 10-minute presentation on the lab platform, and that was all it took. They came back and said, you know what, we need to look at this holistically. So I think the answer is almost yes, right? So phased approach where it makes sense, but sometimes Big Bang also works as well.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Chris. We have one question here for Jeff. Jeff, back in your days, basically, as if you go back, we are taking you, I think, again and again back to when you were a chemist yourself. What is the biggest challenge that you faced at that point of time in the lab? What was hard then?
Yeah. No, thanks for the question, Nikhil. You know, and whoever asked that. Yeah. No, I mean this is a very important topic, and you know I can refer back to my days in the lab where it was some of the biggest challenges revolved around data traceability. Really being able to refer back to past analysis and results that you've done. I mean, so in some respects, without a digital footprint, or your lab going digital. And I was a part of both sides of the coin. If it was not digital, in some respects it was almost impossible to find historical data, historical project information, and so that's why I'm very passionate about being able to offer some insight into what it means for a lab to go digital, and how that really can influence and help being able to meet the whole notion around data traceability. A lot of times we see that the regulatory bodies are forcing it upon the labs, which is fantastic, but at sometimes, I mean, it's very important that if you're not able to track all your data, even historical data, then you're definitely going to come up against some challenges with regard to meeting regulatory requirements. So thanks for the question, Nikhil. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Chris. So we are out of time, unfortunately, but if there are any more questions, feel free to mail us. If you need more information on solutions from SNIC and Siemens here on research, development, and laboratory solutions, please feel free to reach us at sales@snicsolutions.com. Or just visit our website, www.snicsolutions.com. With this, we thank you all for joining this short webinar on a cornerstone to a successful R&D strategy. And back to you, Shabri.
Thank you, Nikhil, and thanks to all our presenters for their great insights. Thanks to our audience for joining us today. We will be sending you a copy of the on-demand webinar soon. Finally, wish you all a very happy holiday season and have a nice day.